So welcome everyone to the Preschool Neuroscience Summit. Today, I'm really excited to have Dr. Craig Hassad with us. He is an internationally recognized expert in mindfulness and has presented and published really widely. He's the co-author of the book Mindfulness for Life. And also mindful learning, reduce stress and improve brain performance for effective learning. So we're really lucky to have him on the summit today. So welcome, Craig, and thanks so much for joining us.
It's a real pleasure to be with you, Helen.
Great. So let's talk just generally first about stress in students, particularly in young students. What does that where does it come from, and what does it show up as in maybe students' behaviors or habits?
Well, stress, we have a stress response, which is meant to be, speaking, what, in a sense, nature meant it for, was getting away from tigers and sharks and, jumping out of the way of danger. That's what we have a stress response. So anytime there's a feeling of threat, that response gets activated. So it's like a turbocharge of energy, adrenaline, and so on. But unfortunately, we can activate the stress response in all sorts of other situations. So if we feel there's a threat to us emotionally, or a threat in any way to my self-esteem, a threat to an idea I hold about myself, a threat to some possession that I identify myself strongly with. So anything that feels threatened that we identify with can activate that fight or flight response. Now, children aren't naturally disposed to activating that stress response in all sorts of situations where it wouldn't actually be required. But children can learn very quickly from adults how to get stressed about things. The children will observe closely, and children will, in a sense, start to model the patterns of thought, the behaviours that they observe in adults around them, particularly, of course, parents, but then at school, teachers. And pretty soon, when that pattern of thinking and behaviour gets reinforced enough, then it can become pretty well established. And one study, for example, was looking at children's, looking at parents' maths anxiety and how they performed in maths at school. And they had children in early primary school, and they looked at how strong a correlation there was between the children's maths anxiety and maths performance at school and their parents. And they found, surprise, surprise, quite a strong correlation, but only in the parents who regularly helped their children with their maths homework. The parents who were maths anxious and didn't perform well in maths, and they didn't go near their children's homework, the children were fine. They performed as well as any other child. I just find that fascinating, because the parents might have thought, I'm trying to help my child with their maths, when what they're actually doing was modeling how to be anxious about maths. And like, here's how to behave when numbers are put in front of you, and I'll show you. Put some numbers in front of me now. Oh no, I was no good at maths. I couldn't do it. Oh no, I used to hate maths at school. Oh well, look, I'll try it. And then of course children, oh, so that's how you behave when maths are put in front of you. And so children who haven't even tried maths, for example, at school, or hardly any, and numbers are put in front of them, and then start getting stressed and saying things like, I can't do maths, I can't do it, when the child hasn't even attempted it yet. And that's not a natural pattern of thinking and behavior for children. It's learned, not in a helpful way.
Yeah, how interesting. So Craig, what can we then do to kind of help our children work through any stress that they're having, besides stay away from them, if we have our own anxiety around the subject?
Well, that's not going to be the only thing, but look, I think the first thing is just to recognize it, and it'll play out in behavior, anxiety, the emotional responses of the child, and so on. And and it can, of course, affect their children's health too. And I think the things to do are firstly to be mindful with the child, to, be conscious and considered in the ways that we behave and respond to stress and challenge and so on. So what we're modeling for children is the behavior that's going to be helpful for them. And so that's certainly very helpful. I mean, obviously, if a child's got very significant issues around anxiety and so on, then the child needs some more professional care and support from a well-trained, say, psychologist who is experienced in working with children. But there's lots of things that children can learn, life skills that children can learn. Obviously, the one that I most spend most of my time working in it relates to mindfulness, but children can learn these kinds of skills, and mindfulness aren't the only skills that children can learn that will help to stand them in good stead. So they're developing life skills from an early age. Because if we don't teach the children how to be mindful and to manage their emotions well, etc., we will be teaching them how to be unmindful and how not to manage their emotions well.
Yeah. So well said. So can we dive in a little more into the mindful learning and maybe explain a little bit about what that means and what that might look like in a classroom?
Yes, well, so mindfulness.
Question,
I'll sum it up in about 30 seconds. So, but I guess essentially it's how mindfulness can be implemented in the classroom, firstly for the teacher to be mindful in the process of teaching the children, how it can be a formal part of the curriculum, so actually teaching children, not just modelling the behaviour from the teacher, but actual part of the curriculum. It can also be in how you create a mindful learning environment, an environment in which it's easy for children to engage attention rather than very difficult, and to be conscious of the things that really impair mindfulness. And there are a number of them these days, which previous generations really didn't have to struggle with like we do now. And a lot of that is related to technology, the misuse and overuse of technology. A significant proportion of children have an addiction, and I'm not using the term figuratively, literally an addiction to their device. If their smartphone's near them while they're trying to do study, smartphone wins over the teacher and their homework every time. So being aware of the things like distraction, the compelling effect for children's attention to go to technology, complex multitasking, noisy environments and so on. So it's to really be conscious of those things that interfere with attention as well, and to, wherever possible, remove those from the environment.
Yeah, I think the whole world of technology is something that, we're, and especially now in this time of COVID, we're encouraging people to be online even more in a lot of cases. So, yeah.
Yes. And look, yes, and it's not that technology is bad, for example, because clearly it can play a very helpful role. But and especially in the COVID situation, it's bridging a gap and it's doing a great job. But if it's misused or overused, children have too much screen time, for example, early in life, too much, if they don't learn to relate to each other as people face to face, but more having virtual relationships via social media and so on. All of these things are having a significant negative effect on children's development, well-being, and social and emotional intelligence. And I think that we need to be a little bit more conscious of that, not just assume that technology is always going to be good and for access to be unfettered.
Yeah, and Craig, what could you share maybe some practical examples that teachers who might be new to mindfulness, what could they do as first steps if they want to practice themselves or bring this to the students that they're working with?
Well, if, for example, teachers practice some regular mindfulness meditation as a way of starting the day, and then maybe at the end of the working day, to put some space between, the classroom, school activities and them getting home and having their own life outside of mindfulness, outside of the school environment. So mindfulness can be a way of starting and also finishing the working day. So that's helpful for one perspective. And not just, and having mini meditations. I like to talk about punctuating your day. So maybe 2 full stops at the start of the working day, at the end of the working day, but lots of little commas. And it might be before stepping in to take a class. And it might be half a minute or a minute. Just to, you know, close up the books and put things in the bag about to head off to the classroom. But maybe just give yourself a half minute just to stop, be present, check in, to be aware of one's own state of mind, body. And because it can be very informative, you know, you stop and have a moment of being aware and you realize, whoa, just take care. This is, you know, you're aware of actually your state. And that can be very informative. But then when in the classroom, to pay attention, when a child's speaking, for example, to really give the child proper attention. If the attention needs to go somewhere, then to have agile attention, excuse me a moment, move your attention somewhere else. So how the teacher models their attention in the classroom. I was running a program for teachers in a school, and one of the year 1 teacher, so these are children who are essentially 5 years old and their first year at school, and it was saying, you know, but how, you know, you 3 children, they all come up and they all start talking at once. And she said, I didn't realize, but I was trying to complex multitask because I'm trying to listen to them all and respond to them all at the same time. And she said, no wonder I feel exhausted and my brain is cooked at the end of the day. And we talked about unitasking. So just one thing, one situation at a time. And she said, well, she tried to apply that when she was communicating with the children. And she said, you know, when we're having a debrief the following week, 3 children, they came up, they're all starting to talk at once. And she, whoop, I'll be with you in a moment. You're first, I'll be with you in a moment. Now, yes, what did you want to say? And she engaged her attention fully with one child at a time, gave a clear response. She said the way that she communicated was different. You know, it was much more clear and direct. And the next child, no, I'll be with you in a moment. Yeah, good. And then she said she managed her own attention differently. And so she responded better, she processed things better, gave clearer responses. But what she said was, and she didn't intend this, and there's research that showed that this happens, that the behavior of the children in the classroom started to change. Not because but just because the children, you know, 3 would come up at once and, oh, they'd all stop and they'd just line up and want to go first. So what she was doing for modeling was modeling for the children, a way of, you know, managing your impulses and emotions and how to just do things one at a time. And so that's the first thing as well, is to be mindful with the children. And then you can, of course, bring mindfulness into the classroom. So at the start of a class, the class together has a mindful minute, for example, because the body, you know, after lunchtime, for example, the body gets into the classroom, but the mind is probably still out in the playground. So a mindful minute at the start of a class helps the mind to catch up with the body and for the children to settle and be ready to engage their attention with the class. So there's lots and lots of different ways of bringing it into the day, into the class and school culture, if you like. And so, but there's some of perhaps the basic principles.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for sharing those. So mindfulness is becoming more and more kind of popular or expanding, which makes me very happy. But what maybe are some of the misconceptions or things that we should be aware of around bringing in mindfulness into schools?
Well, I think if in terms of bringing it into a school, if it's not done well, it'll probably be done poorly. So, for example, if teachers don't understand it and they haven't applied it in their own life, and somebody says, oh, you got to bring mindfulness into the classroom, and teachers are actually modeling inattention and distraction for the children, and then they're still talking about mindfulness, it won't go over well. Because the children will pick up more of what the teacher does rather than what they say. It can be taught inappropriately. So, clear your minds, children, get the thoughts out of your head, or, if there's some kinds of basic misunderstandings about it, then the children struggle with their thoughts and so on, rather than just learning to be aware and learning to notice, and just gently, and using metaphors for children, especially young children, just your thoughts, just like leaves on a stream, just floating down the stream, just let them come and go. There's no need to even think they shouldn't be. They're just standing back, so that the children can learn simple ways of learning to be mindful, and how to learn to be comfortable in the presence of their own emotions, and sometimes uncomfortable emotions, but how to be gentle with themselves, and how to stand back from those emotions and not necessarily feel controlled by them. So these skills are very important. If a teacher doesn't understand how to apply it themselves, then they'll probably misinform the teachers. If a school that wants to bring it in, and there was one study that looked at bringing in mindfulness, and it's a program called the .B program, and it's a very, very good program, very good program. But it didn't produce in this study good results in the school. So the children who had the program were no better than the children who didn't. But when they looked at it, it was just somebody from outside the school coming in, taking a half-hour lesson once a week over a few weeks, and then going again. And there were very few children who practiced what they learned. It wasn't reinforced by the teachers. The parents weren't informed and weren't supporting it at home. So it wasn't well integrated at all into the school. And so the children hardly practiced it. It wasn't a part of the school day. And so it really didn't go well. So if schools don't integrate it properly, train up the teachers, inform them in what it is and why, then it's probably not going to have a great effect. And the mistaken idea is, so mindfulness didn't work. It's not. If it's not well implemented, and if it's not done properly, it doesn't work. It's like exercise. We had an exercise program at our school, but nobody got any fitter. Well, why? Well, nobody did any exercise. So it's like it's not being properly implemented.
Yeah. Yes, very, very, really important information there. And Craig, what does the research show about the impact on ourselves, on our brains, on children's learning, and when it is implemented properly and supported well with the parents and other people in the school?
Yes, there are a number of reviews of a significant body of studies now. There's a lot more to do, but from what's there, children perform better at school, so they learn better, they listen better. For example, they learn better so they can remember more when they're being taught. They understand concepts better. So their performance academically improves, but then there's a whole psychological well-being side of things, so less stress, better mental health, less anxiety and so on if they're taught these skills. Better able to regulate their emotions, better able to communicate and relate to others, so it really helps to foster the development of emotional intelligence and communication. Most of the studies on being more pro-social are done on adults. The ones that are on children as well confirm the same thing, that mindfulness helps to increase pro-sociality, so people become more aware of others, more considerate of others, which is very, very important as well. So there's a range of benefits that have been found in the research so far. Most of the studies on the brain have been done on adults rather than children. But where the signpost is pointing is that it helps the stress center in the brain, the amygdala, to quieten down. It helps the development of the prefrontal cortex, areas of the brain associated with attention, working memory, problem solving, creativity. So these areas of the brain seem to work better. So there's a whole range of benefits that seem to come with the same practice, but it helps a number of areas of the brain to develop and to work better. It's been found to stimulate new brain cell growth. So even in adults, so we know that neurogenesis, that's developing new brain cells, happens very readily in children. but even in adults right into old age, that it actually stimulates new brain cell growth in these executive functioning and memory centers as well. Some of the interesting work there on problem solving and creativity is that it helps to foster creativity, which is, I think, very interesting and important. That variations of mindfulness practice seem to foster different kinds of creativity.
Okay.
So, for example, divergent thinking, which is your ability to come up with a sort of a, the seed of an idea, blue sky thinking, the brainstorming, sort of like the moment of inspiration. So that's sort of the divergent thinking. And the convergent thinking is your ability to focus down and to turn that idea into something, to plan it, to unpack it, to organize it, to deliver it. And so the open monitoring mindfulness practices seem to foster divergent thinking. The focused attention practices seem to foster convergent thinking. So, but it's very early days in terms of that research, though. But I think very interesting, though.
Yeah, very interesting for sure. And what's your hope, Craig, kind of on a more global scale for mindfulness in schools? What are the things that you would like to see happen, whether that's in governments or down to the individual school level?
I would hope that life skills like mindfulness are taught as a normal part of school work of training. So reading, writing, arithmetic, but life skills. Because now more than ever, children's attention is being increasingly distracted. There are studies on the brain that show that 3 areas of the brain are being very negatively affected, in particular, by the online world. Attention circuits, memory circuits, circuits associated with social and emotional intelligence. Children are growing up in a complex, distracted kind of world. And so now more than ever, children need to learn to train their attention, learn to develop self-awareness, learn to develop awareness of others and to communicate. So this is I would hope, going to be seen as a life skill that is a normal part of curriculum, and that it's taught in different ways, in different contexts throughout a child's schooling, primary school, through to secondary school, and in getting on into secondary school, dealing with, exam anxiety and coping with, when the academic pressures go up another notch and so on. And then in the future careers, in training in university, that it's taken to the next level in terms of how do you focus this on you developing your career. So it's a journey right through of development of increasing depth and ability to apply in more and more nuanced and contextualized ways for children. So that's my hope. And some schools are certainly taking that on board as perhaps a philosophy of how to do things.
Yeah, well, that sounds really wonderful, and hopefully that's the way. There's lots of really good things going on all over the world in different contexts and countries, helping children in these times. So just before we finish today, Craig, do you have any tips or thoughts about what we mentioned earlier? So we're in this time of COVID, a lot of parents and teachers are maybe feeling more overwhelmed and anxious, and then having to kind of negotiate homeschooling or working through a computer, especially with very young children. Do you have any tips on how to make that a more mindful learning environment for all involved?
Yes, well, look, I think if a family can practice mindfulness together, if families can really communicate meaningfully together, rather than having the face and the phone while child's talking, and so modeling inattention, modeling, a child picks up from that, don't care, and the parent doesn't mean to do that. So to really engage properly, when interacting with children, to take each day, and in fact each moment, one step, one job at a time, because this is a really easy time to get ahead of ourselves and to catastrophize about the future, etc. now there are complex and challenging things to deal with, but what's going to get the job done is to pay attention to what is, and to try and not catastrophize about what if, because what is enough to deal with. And if we can model that kind of way of being with children, then they can pick that up for themselves, and they can learn how to step themselves through complex situations, one step, one moment, one job at a time. And if we can model that for children, if things like mindfulness can be a part of the rhythm of the day, and also for children who might be spending a lot of time in front of the screen and so on, children and the developing brain needs real experience, not virtual experience. So to really make sure that there's time to get out of the house, fresh air, be physically active, and get out into nature, to have tactile sensory experience of being in nature and outdoors is really going to be very, very vitally important from a whole lot of different areas, not just physical activity, but also from a mental health and a brain developmental point of view, because the developing brain needs a tactile sensory world to interact with. Too much screen time does not exercise the brain in the way that it needs. And so I think there are perhaps a few of the things that can be really helpful. And just having things to be creative as well, to do creative things together as a family, I think is really, really helpful as well.
Yeah, thank you. Great advice there for this kind of unprecedented time in modern history anyways. So thank you again, Craig, for coming on and sharing. We'll have a link to Craig's book, Mindful Learning, Reduce Stress and Improve Brain Performance for Effective Learning, if you want to check that out. And I just want to say thank you again for joining us on the summit and sharing all your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Helen. It's been a real pleasure, and great work that you're doing to put this summit on.
Thank you.